Now, all day long, our Pepper Baker has been sitting down with leaders within the community, from politicians to local leaders, to get their reaction to President Trump's visit today. And she continues that marathon of interviews. Pepper, you've been doing a great job today. Let's go back now to Pepper Baker. She's joined now by Representative Justin Pearson. Pepper.
Thank you, Ruben. That's probably the nicest thing you've ever said to me.
Don't get used to it.
All right. State Representative Justin J. Pearson is in the studio. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. I know you're busy. It's a big day. Whether or not, whatever side you lean on, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, was in Memphis. So let's just start there. What do you think of the President of the United States, Donald Trump, coming to Memphis?
Look, I don't support Donald Trump being in Memphis. The reality is we're being used as a pawn in his playbook of authoritarianism. And when he announced this task force, that was part of the deal, that he was going to come after Democratic-led, black-led cities. And now that we have a war in Iran, that his name's appeared thousands of times in the Epstein files, that groceries and gas prices are skyrocketing through the roof, he's using us as a part of his distraction and as a ploy. And I don't think that's the positioning that we want to have. We've asked since before the task force was here that we need poverty eradication, not military occupation. We need resources. And the millions of dollars that they're spending every single day could be used to expand access to affordable housing, increase access to health care, provide educational resources. Those are the things that people want to see to actually address the root causes of the problems that we have. And this administration and this president has done everything to take those away from us.
Okay. Now, we did hear from some Memphians who were really interested to hear about the other aspects of what causes crime. They wanted to know if President Donald Trump was going to address poverty particularly. But there was a protest also today. So I just want to ask, obviously you weren't in the round table and you weren't at President Donald Trump's visit. So where did you feel your time was best utilized today?
My time was best utilized with the people that I represent, my amazing constituents in this district. And over 300 of us gathered on Macon Road and we protested this administration and also protested for investment. We don't want to see further militarization and occupation of our communities. We want people to feel safe, and we know that safety comes from real public investments. That's not what's happening with this task force. That's not what Governor Lee has proposed. And the things that have happened have separated families, deported people, created more traumatization, and hasn't actually dealt with any of the root causes that we know need to be tackled. And I, like so many other people, do not want to see crime in our city, do not want to see crime increase, but we all know that if we're ever going to tackle the root causes of these problems, we're going to have to do something about poverty. There's no way around it. And so the day after this task force leaves, which the mayors and everyone should be fighting for, when are you all leaving? We know we're going to be dealing with a community that's more traumatized, a community that has been more harmed, and still not dealt with the root causes of the problems. But today, at our rally, it was so much love. And it was so much joy. It was the best of Memphis gathering together to say, look, we are a strong community. We're a beloved community. And we have a fighting spirit, but we also have a loving spirit in this place. And so that's where I was. I was with my constituents.
We did have our reporter Shakina Davis out there, and we'll have a report from her tonight on the protests as well. Was the protest a protest against the Memphis Safe Task Force, or was it against President Donald Trump?
It was both.
Okay.
It was both. You cannot take away the fact that Donald Trump, since he has been in office, there has been 300,000 black women who have lost their jobs. We have seen an increase in bigotry and xenophobia, particularly against immigrant communities. The big ugly bill that was passed took $5 billion away from our state budget, which I've been reading and going through now. And so we're dealing with a deficit actually of $6 billion in our state budget because of this administration's decision. He is a vile, evil person. Who is not only racist with his imagery of President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama, depicting them as apes. He is a rapist of E. Jean Carroll. This isn't someone that we should be praising or supporting. We need to look at him for who he is, and he is the elected President of the United States, and he's also an elected authoritarian who doesn't care about our community. And the first thing he said in his words weren't about how beautiful this place is, how beloved it is. He's talking about the sound system and the speaker system. Right? Like, he's not a serious person. And he honestly has done things that are dangerous. And in our community, we're experiencing that danger with the separations, even of an 18-year-old going to soccer practice. But we can't forget Alex Preddy, Dr. Linda Davis. We can't forget Renee Good. We can't forget Keith Porter, people who died because of this president's actions. That's what we are dealing with And as a community, we have a responsibility, and as elected officials, we have a responsibility not just to talk about, abolish this or we're against that, but to show up for people who are being harmed, to show up for people who want and need a voice. And that's what I was fortunate to be able to do today.
Okay. Now, what would you say as far as, so everybody kind of has their metric of the root causes of crime, and poverty is one of them. And but what would you have to say about law enforcement and ramping up law enforcement efforts as possibly being a first step? So we can't ignore that there are people out here who think that the Safe Task Force is making Memphis safer. There's 7,100 arrests, 1,000 illegal guns seized. These are the numbers from the task force. Of course, there's a lot of nuance there, and there needs to be a little bit more transparency. But the first step in some people's minds was just getting enforcement in the streets and getting it to a place where crime could trend down. What do you have to say about that being a first step, and then going to other root causes like poverty and needing more resources for, let's say, young people? I guess my question really is just the Memphis Safe Task Force's progress. Can that be considered a step towards a safer Memphis?
One of the things, I think two things here, but one that you mentioned, there's been no transparency about the data that they're collecting, right? Even the numbers that you just said, we don't know how factual those are. We don't have a public platform that's showcasing where these numbers are coming from. And so what does that mean? This is propaganda being pushed by this administration, and you and so many others are being forced to use the numbers that they're presenting to show that Memphis is filled with black criminality, and thus it needed this overhanded approach from the federal government in order to deal with itself, because its mayor can't do it, its city councilor can't do it, its state house members, its state representatives can't do it. Why? Because they're Democratic led and because they're black led. That is the narrative that is being pushed by this administration and by the governor, Bill Lee, as well. I disagree with that. I believe that with the appropriate resources, we'd be the place that we know we want to be, one that provides young kids access to after-school programs, one that ensures there's more housing for people. We know we need 50,000 units of housing for people who make $17,000 a year. Our state has the highest medical debt of any state in the United States of America. Help us with the real problems. And the truth of the matter is, and I have some constituents who have been supportive of the task force until, honestly, they got their doors kicked in, and they thought it was going to impact somebody else, and then it starts to impact them, and they start to feel differently about it. But I'll say this, people are worried about safety. The question that I have as an elected leader is always, why are our options either the status quo or militarization? We're never given another option of investment. A check from the federal government for the $186 million that they spent on this task force. Why wasn't the mayor offered those resources to deal with violence intervention and crime prevention programs? This happened in the 1990s too, under Bill Clinton's leadership with the crime bill. We were told we were going to deal with more crime, the status quo, or you're going to have 3 strikes rules, which again disproportionately hurt black and brown communities. Why are our communities, why is Memphis, why is Shelby County, why is this district never being considered for the hundreds of millions of resources that we need? And now you have the Department of Defense asking for $200 billion for Trump's war in Iran. $200 billion. But when I make requests for a few billion to be invested in our city, people look at you like you have 3 heads. There are misplaced priorities going on, and our leaders need to demand that we get true resources to deal with these problems and not kowtow and not capitulate to this authoritarian.
And when you speak about leaders, Memphis Mayor Paul Young decided to have a separate press conference today, and he did not or wasn't visibly seen at the Trump visit. So he mentioned the 40% drop in crime since 2023, but he also mentioned 10,000 housing units. That's like a goal he wants to have here. I wanted to ask you, you touched on a lot, but you mentioned, having a Republican governor with a Republican president, and we're this blue dot in a very deep red state, and what city leaders can and can't do. So how have you felt about Memphis Mayor Paul Young's approach, and even today where he mentions like not being agreeable on some parts of ICE, but at the end of the day, he has to take this collaborative approach? How do you feel that he's navigated this?
Listen, I think the responsibility of anyone who leads our city and who leads in any position is to support those who are the most vulnerable and who are the most marginalized. You don't stand in a position of complacency, nor do you stand on the position of the oppressor. You say who is being most harmed and impacted. If 300 people, loved ones, are being deported or being detained, you stand with them and you do everything that you can within your power to prevent that from happening. That's the type of leadership, that's the type of urgency we must have. And I believe one of the things that Mayor Young has the ability to do and power to do is to ensure that any state, any city resources are not being used in collaboration with ICE or the Border Patrol or Homeland Security. I've seen several videos where ICE is riding in the front of Memphis police cars. That's something he has authority and power over, and that needs to cease immediately. We do not need to spend any tax dollars helping to separate our families, helping to separate families in our community, helping to harm and traumatize children. We do not need to invest in that. If the federal government is coming in against our will, then it needs to feel like it is against our will and not like we're capitulating or in collaboration with them, because that's hurting our community in the short term and in the long term.
Now, I know today's event was invite only, but would you have liked to have seen somebody at the table who could have spoken on what Memphis needs in addition to or instead of Memphis Safe Task Force?
Absolutely. We needed a voice at the table to advocate for what Memphis needs. That would have been our mayor. That would have been someone who could probably articulate that. I would have happily been there. But the reality is this administration doesn't care about what Memphis needs. And that's what all of your amazing listeners and people have to realize. This administration is only using us as a pawn and as a ploy, as a part of a game that they're playing to make our cities and our communities run as though they're ruled by an authoritarian. And when you see this coming up in the midterms and National Guardsmen or federal troops or federal law enforcement agents are standing in front of our polling places trying to intimidate voters, you will realize that this was all just a scheme and a scam. And the reality is this administration doesn't care anything about this city, and we need leadership that is going to speak up and advocate for us. We cannot capitulate to the desires and the wants of an authoritarian who doesn't give a single care about us. That's not the responsibility, and that's not good leadership. That's cowardice. And in this moment in time, every elected leader needs to speak up on behalf of the most marginalized and the most vulnerable, because the truth of the matter is some people are feeling the effects necessarily of this task force. Some people don't know and don't have any loved ones who have been locked up at 201 Poplar. They don't know any families who face separation. But I've had dozens of kids coming to my office in Nashville, driving up from Memphis, asking for us to do something. I have loved ones who have folks who are locked up at 201 Poplar in unsafe and inhumane conditions. And those are the folks that we have to have voice for, not the people who are comfortable. It's the people who are hurting because of the actions of this administration that leaders speak up for.
There's definitely two sides to it. People who feel safer and, are positively complimenting the Memphis Safe Task Force. And then there are, to your point, people who feel victimized, people who are being separated from their families. So it is very important to note that both sides exist here. So President Donald Trump came down or landed around 11:30, if you will, made his way to the Armory where he gave the round table speech, made it to Graceland, and then headed back to the airport and out. I could tell by your facial expression. Did you expect anything else, or was it everything you thought it would be? Is there anything else about his visit that you would have liked to have seen?
Look, it's sickening that the President of the United States was here in the first place using us as a pawn, but also that as we are in a war, Trump has a war with Iran going on, where 13 service members thus far have been killed because of his actions. When gas prices are nearly $4 a gallon, grocery prices are skyrocketing, and people are struggling just to make it, that he has time to go and visit Graceland. What type of leader is that? Just imagine for a moment if President Obama did that at the height of a war. There would be chaos on all news stations in all different spheres. But this is being allowed because we've allowed this white supremacist to set the standards for the office of president at the floor. And anything that he does, we say, okay, well, that's better than nothing. I think that's despicable. The consequences of who he is and his actions as president of the United States have left hundreds of thousands of people in worse predicaments and positions. Hundreds of thousands have died since we closed USAID. The Doge program that he supported with Elon Musk led again to the firing of hundreds of thousands of black women in particular out of the federal government. We are suffering under this administration. Many people who are already struggling are only struggling more. And you have businesses now in our city that are closing or near the verge of closing, which is why I consistently go into places like Sugar Shack, because we need to keep that open. On Beale Street, these are black businesses that are suffering because of the actions of this administration. We are dealing with a crisis at the same time that he's going to Graceland. And we deserve and we need to have voices that are speaking up and crying out in the wilderness, if you will, to say we deserve respect, we deserve justice, we deserve investment. We don't want the unsafe task force. We want investment that is actually going to be long-term and beneficial to the people who we represent.
All right, two lasting questions. What was the big message you said to the protesters today?
Yeah, to the protesters and the angelic dissenters to the status quo, I told them to first give themselves a round of applause and give a round of applause to the people who were with them, because this is what democracy looks like. It looks like this pluralistic society of people from so many different socioeconomic statuses, races, ethnicities, different religions getting together and saying who we are together is what America is supposed to represent. It isn't a vision of division, right? It isn't the articulation of hatred and of separation, but rather the possibility when we share common values and we share common ground that helps us to make the ideals of our country more possible. Because the ideals in America, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal, right? All of those things only become more real if we do something. That doesn't just happen just because. And today, seeing them marching, protesting, speaking up, laughing, celebrating, listening to music together, that is how we make the ideals of our country more real. And that's the spirit of who we are, from Ida B. Wells to the sanitation workers to today.
Oh, wonderful. And what was the path, or how long did you all walk for?
We walked down Macon. It's probably about a mile there,
yeah.
about a mile back, and it was about 300 people. It was really extraordinary to see folks, a lot of different ages, from 5 to 55 to 85, who were out there in solidarity, because what this administration has done to the fabric of democracy and to our communities is going to have generational ramifications. And we have to be strong, and we have to build power, even in times like this.
Okay. Now, lastly, you mentioned the timeline. We did not get that answer. Even from the roundtable, it sounded like even President Donald Trump said in 2 months, you all are trending to a point where it could almost be a crime-free city. So I took that as at least 2 more months of Memphis Safe Task Force being here. Memphis Mayor Paul Young couldn't answer that either, didn't have that information. So moving forward, crime trending down is something I think all Memphians want, as you said earlier. But what do you want to see, or what should people be doing, paying attention to in these as we move forward, and with this unknown of where the Memphis Safe Task Force will be?
Absolutely. I mean, really, before day one, our mayors should have gotten an answer for when this would end, because right now we have to exist and operate as though this is going to persist in perpetuity. Not knowing means until Donald Trump is no longer president of the United States. And so what do we do in between time? I see a lot of organizations, Free the 901, Vicendarios 901, who continue to film interactions with Homeland Security and ICE in particular, who are watching what the National Guard is doing. We have to stay vigilant and know our rights. That's the first step. I think another thing is to make sure our demands remain clear. We need investments. And so as the city mayor and county mayor, as folks are going into budget season, how are they actually going to address housing? How are they going to address access to medical care? How are we going to protect our veterans? How are we going to protect our environment and our climate? How are we going to end the gun violence epidemic? Because that's not even been mentioned in these conversations, that our state continues to pass laws that make it easier for people to access firearms instead of making it a little bit more challenging. You don't even need a permit to carry a firearm in this state, but yet they want to talk about crime, bigger problem. We need leadership in this moment, in this time at our local level, that shows us what our values are through a moral budget document. That's what I'm looking forward to see. Because if the administration will not leave, that does not mean our resistance will stop. We are going to continue to persist that our city, that our county, do everything that they can to improve the quality of people's lives here, and that our U.S. Congress does their job, because their capitulation has pretty much left us with a unitary executive. We need leadership in this moment in time that is going to speak up, but is also going to stand with the people. Not go off and do their own thing, but to stand with the constituents and the people who need to be heard. And that's folks who may be supportive, people who may not be supportive, but making sure that we hold the line. We don't need an authoritarian's overreach into our community. What we need is federal government investment into the billions of dollars, just like you can come up with billions for war, come up with billions of dollars to help Memphis to become the place that we know it can be.
Okay, and you know, I'm going to be remiss if I don't ask this. Let me fit this one, because you talked about when people are voting for people and needing to know what they're for. President Trump had two things that kind of came out of his address today. One of them was that he wants Republicans to prioritize some Homeland Security bill, and that is that no one can vote unless you have voter ID and proof of citizenship. The other thing he declared today, with the help of Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, was that National Guard troops will now get the same benefits and pay as active duty military. So, you know, what do you have to say about those two things? Now that then it almost feels like more of encouragement going into the National Guard to be paid and to have benefits like active duty.
Yeah, on the first front, what he's talking about is the SAVE Act, which is going to make it much more difficult, particularly for women, to be able to vote if they've changed their names. And so this is a nothing but voter suppression, which Republicans have been doing for decades now. This is just the next iteration. And I believe it's already passed through the Senate. And so this fight is going to the U.S. House of Representatives now, and we'll see what version they come up with. But at the state level, we're also going to see similar bills. And there's a slate that Stephen Miller, who's the deputy chief of staff, has pushed that is completely anti-immigrant, that's xenophobic, and that's hate-filled, that he's trying to push through the Tennessee House of Representatives and the Tennessee Senate right now. Our government and governmental leaders, our democratic institutions, lowercase d, are being taken advantage of by billionaires and by authoritarians who want power and control. It doesn't have anything to do with your life improving or my life improving. It doesn't have anything to do with people, getting access to their first homes or making life better for us. It is about how they can concentrate power. And if they can dilute our vote, then they know we won't be able to have a voice, which is why last time I was here, I told you about Activate Tennessee. But in April, we're launching Activate Tennessee the first Tuesday, because we want inactive voters to go to the polls. We want people to know that our power is still in this democracy. And if we do not use it, we will continue to lose even the glimmers that we currently have. And on the second thing, they have spent more billions of dollars for the Customs and Border Patrol, for ICE, than we've seen in generations. And so it doesn't surprise me that further militarization is a part of their mindset. That's not accidental or coincidental. And the truth of the matter is, it has gotten horrible in this administration, but it was also happening before, even under a Democratic president, where ICE and Customs and Border Patrol were getting billions and billions of dollars. And you even had some Democratic Congress members who were supporting that legislation that has gotten us to this place. Now a lot of people are talking about abolish ICE, but before they were supporting billion-dollar packages for these entities that have been separating families and that have been creating a lot of consternation for communities for a long time. And so this is going to be a multifaceted approach that we're going to need to address at the national level, at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level. But what empowers me are the people that we represent, that have the privilege of representing and seeing, who remain committed to the cause of justice and wanting life to be better for everybody. And the scripture talks about it matters what we do for the least of these. And in our country, in this time, we have to look at who's being most targeted, who's being most harmed, and how are we advocating for them to be able to live the full lives that God intended. That's the work.
Okay, you've made a good case there. All right, thank you so much, Representative Pearson. I appreciate your time. All right, thank you for tuning in on this. We're going to go back to Ruben Diaz, who's going to give us a little more of a breakdown of what President Donald Trump said on his visit today.